One of my favorite things that I've put in the Meliason tree over the years is the museum has in its collection this absolutely beautiful pair of green plaid stockings that were never worn. And I love putting that in the tree because it's colorful and everything, but it's a fine example of a present that would appear in the tree. Now, there might be some things that are too heavy to put in the tree, but they would be put under the tree and not necessarily wrapped. You don't start seeing the wrapping stuff until we start leaving presents out for these longer periods of time of temptation to go, oh, I wonder what's in that box.
Yeah, but they'd still maybe have the tag. They would have a tag
Yes.
with somebody's name on it, but you could see it, and big surprise, it's there. You're opening it in 5 minutes because it's Christmas
Yeah.
Eve, and that's the first time you're going to see it.
Right. One of the funnest distribution ways I ever read about was the cobweb. You, it's kind of like the pie where you'd have a present and you'd have this long ribbon. Well, this utilizes string, and you would run this string all over your parlor or whatever room you chose to do this in, and you have all these presents hidden in the room. And you had to find the end of the string with the tag with your name on it, and then you had to follow the string until you found your present. That's just another way of making it a fun distribution method, and also possibly breaking some furniture at the same time.
Sure.
But
What about lights? There's such an association with Christmas and lights, but where does that come from? Because it doesn't start with electric lights for dozens of years, even until the 1920s, I think, is when Christmas lights really
I
start
believe
to get
that
going
is
electrically.
It's tied in with the Christmas Carol Silent Night, and I'm going to misremember all of this. I'm certain, but it was something about putting candles in the tree at that time, and it was a minister, and don't quote me on this. I'm sure I've got this all wrong, but you start seeing candles being put in trees. And you start seeing this in illustration. Probably the most popular illustration was Queen Victoria and her family, the illustration that was in the magazine in England, and then it was Americanized, and they stuck an American flag. But you see little candles clipped onto the tree.
Oh.
And that's where that kind of picked up and came more organized. There's mythology associated with that too. The thing about that is you did not light that and just go about your day. They were lit for a very brief period of time. Probably, if you had a tree in your house, you would have it closed off. You would light the candles. Everybody would come in and admire the tree, and then all of the candles were doused because you did not want to have any type of a fire or anything like that. Oftentimes, if you look at illustrations, you might not necessarily find any candles on the tree. This particular, there's an image that we have from our collection. It's one of our glass plate negatives, and this tree has one candle on it.
Oh.
And so it's just one light on there, but they were not left lit for a long period of time. That myth has been popularized in some movies and things over the years. But no one can argue that a lighted Christmas tree is absolutely beautiful.
No, and I looked up kind of the history of Christmas electric lights, and the association with those in a Christmas tree, and this sort of begins. It's not a process. It's not a thing where it's invented and the next day it's a huge success. But beginning in 1880, Thomas Edison actually created the first strand of electric lights. In 1882, his partner at the company, Edison's Illumination Company, put a string of electric Christmas lights on a tree. That's the first documented time. But there's such a fear still of electricity and what it can do in the 1880s that this doesn't really...
What can cause cancer,
Oh, yeah. So there you go. Or kill you and, light your house on fire and all those sorts of ideas, which were common. There's kind of this gradual process where Christmas electric lights on a tree become popularized. It actually starts with the presidency, if you believe it or not.
Yes.
President Grover Cleveland is the first person to have indoor electric Christmas lights in the White House, and that's in 1895. Later on, Calvin Coolidge has a Christmas tree that's lit outside with it's the national Christmas tree, the first one in 1923, and that had 3,000 electric lights on it, just south of the White House. And not until the 20s, do electric Christmas lights really begin to become popular in the minds of Americans, but they become accessible at that time as well, because for the longest time they were, kind of a gadget that was really only available to the wealthiest Americans. I have a statistic here that said that to light an average Christmas tree in 1903 with electric lights would have cost around $2,000 in today's money.
Yeah, that makes sense. And electricity was not widespread. Not every house was set up for it. You had to wait for the technology to catch up to, so that it would be more available. And also, you had to, not everybody had a Christmas tree in your house, and that didn't become more common until after World War II.
Yeah, it's a German tradition, I think, the Christmas tree originally. There's stories of
That's the mythology, the theory. It's grounded in a lot of truth, and it comes out of Germany but it's that popularization is, kudos to Queen Victoria and her family, because they're the ones that kind of brought it into a higher popularity.
which might have something to do with Prince Albert.
Yes, Prince Albert was being German and all that.
Yeah, might have had something to do with her appreciation for it. So I just have a couple other questions. We kind of hit most of the stuff I was hoping to get to. There's tons more we could go into, but
We could spend weeks on doing this.
yeah,
I'm pretty
absolutely.
sure.
But where would you say Christmas, as we would recognize it, really starts to take hold
I
in this area?
think that you start seeing it again after World War II, when we start seeing, there's aspects of it that are starting to grow in the 20th century, but it's a 20th century phenomena. What we do as Christmas, where Christmas starts so early, and all of the decorating and everything like that gets its start after the boys come home from the war.
Gotcha.
And you start seeing it, because they're getting their houses, there's more disposable income, they can do a lot more things, and so you start seeing all of this stuff become available and readily available to even people who have modest means. The whole Victorian Christmas ideal, I think, starts coming in the 1970s, where you start seeing all of this, the Laura Ashley and Gunny Sacks, which I know you don't know what those are, but they're popular Victorian things that came about in the 1970s, and that's when you start seeing all of this Victorian ideal, because people are hearkening back to a simpler time.
Sure.
But they basically overdid it a little bit, because it wasn't anywhere close to what a real, unless you were extremely wealthy,
Yeah.
wasn't anywhere close to what a real Victorian period Christmas was.
And and that's probably just a miscommunication, due in large part because the people who would have photographed Christmas morning in their home in 1870 with a Christmas tree, and like everything we talked about, having a decorated Christmas tree in the 1870s with presents that were heavy enough to be at the bottom of it, we're going to be in a home that was,
Yeah, we're talking Vanderbilts here.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
yeah.
So people look at those black and white photos of all the things that they recognize, and they go, "Oh, look what they had in the 1870s," which in reality was
not everybody had that.
hardly anybody.
And there's all these people who did not celebrate Christmas too. That we don't even talk about all of the other winter celebrations that were other religious or ethnic groups, and what they practiced during that time period. So that's, again, a whole nother kettle of fish. But it was a much simpler time back then. And well, although it is really fun to read, if you have a chance to read 19th century newspapers, Chronicling America, if you go in to Chronicling America, which is Library of Congress, you can type in the word Christmas in there. It's a digitized newspapers, and these are from all over the United States, and you can see all the numbers of times that the word Christmas appears
Sure.
in there, and then just start reading some of the newspaper articles. It's a great deal of fun, and it will take up a large quantity of time.
But while it was simpler, I do want to stress that it was still highly important to everybody.
Yes.
And even though their celebrations might have looked different than ours, they still valued them in much the same way as anyone today might in the U.S.
And the nice part about it is you have all these cultures coming together into these communities, and then you start seeing people adopt, hey, I really like what you do for the holiday. I think I'm going to adopt that and do that in my house.
Yeah.
And that's where you start seeing some of this merging together of ideas and practices.
This will be the last question, is there a Christmas holiday tradition that is, still practiced today that you are a fan of and has like a cool historical origin, or one that's fallen out of vogue that you wish would come back?
Well, I think that in reading the newspapers, and I know in this crazy year that we're doing right now, all of the practice of the different things that were going on in the community, where you would have the little plays at Barton Backs, where you'd have the programs going on at the Liederkranz, where you'd have a cantata at this church, where you'd have the school kids doing a program at this school. And the people in the community would move from one to the other. And then the whole, the week between Christmas and New Year's, and pretty much there was a ball happening every night, or some type of an event that you could go to. And I think that just being able to do that type of thing, just bustle from one to the other, I think that would be a great deal of fun to experience.
The 12 Days of Christmas is not just a song. It used to be a real time of year that ended not until January 5th or January 6th.
Correct.
And so you would see these balls happening and just get-togethers in general, feasts even, until January 6th, which celebrated, correct me if I'm wrong, 12th night, the arrival or the visit of the three wise men to the nativity. Yeah.
And the culmination was the 12th night ball, and there was and this again, it would be for the more wealthy, where they would have these grand balls, and your supper was not served till midnight, and there was a special cake, and you'd find out who got the pea and the bean, who the king and the queen were in the 12th night cake. And sometimes there was even a prize for the fool, whoever the fool was, and all of that. And so having a 12th night ball is rather fun. We did that for a few years. So
I really like working at a museum. One of the things I enjoy the most is reading the newspapers from the area that I, represent here. And I love just reading these little columns that are essentially in every newspaper.
The local and personals.
The local and personals that talk about like what everybody's doing. And, there was somebody whose job it was to just kind of report what everyone in town was doing.
Yeah, who's visiting who, and who's doing this, and who bought that.
And that was going on at Christmas as well. One from the Grand Island Free Press in 1899 just says, there's probably 20, 30, 40 of these, and they say Mrs. Fred Sims and daughter and Mrs. Neil DeVore and children came in from Bayard, Nebraska on Saturday to spend holidays with relatives and friends. W.E. Collins spent Christmas at home with folks in Phillips. Charlie Price is reported quite sick with tonsillitis, but still wishes his family Christmas tidings, like stuff like that. Mm-hmm. There's a ton of them. And then in this Christmas issue here from the Wood River Sunbeam, the person who writes this, her name is Mrs. Henry Madison. We don't know her first name, unfortunately.
They left those out a lot with women.
Including Mrs. Santa Claus, as you will have remembered from the first episode of the Christmas podcast. But at the conclusion of her update on things going on in the Christmas season in Wood River, she says, I wish to thank all of you who have helped me this last year by giving me their news items for the Wood River paper. My sincere thanks. And so, it's just, it's not much, but this is a person who clearly really appreciated and wanted people to know what was going on in her community, and that's just not something we do anymore.
Yeah, most small towns had a local correspondent, and they would report to the newspapers, and that's what filled a lot of these columns. And those columns are such a boon to researchers because there's a lot of everyday life that we would not know about without those.
Exactly. Well, we're going to leave it there. Kay Cynova, Director of Interpretation here at Stuhr Museum, thank you once again for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
This will conclude the Christmas episode. We'll be back early on next year with the next season of the Stuhr Crazy Podcast.